Hello and welcome to Global 9 Honors ReviewCast. This is going to be for our test coming up this week. This is week 24 of our school year, March 1st through the 5th. The only homework assignments that you'll have this week are to review for our test. A carryover from last week, you may have the Rome DBQ due on Tuesday evening. That was instead of last Friday night. But throughout this week, if you are able to complete some of the review tasks, including listening to this screencast, that would be great. Your teachers might provide you with a couple of different practice links that you may find helpful. So moving into what our test will incorporate, there'll be 30 questions. Most of them are all multiple choice. There are a couple of matching questions for some basic vocabulary of a couple of different units. Primarily with religion and primarily with religion. So here in this review cast, we're going to talk about the Stone Ages, the river valleys, religions, and then Greece and Rome. So we started off our school year with Paleolithic and Neolithic, and really they're both the same Stone Age era. Okay, they use stone tools in the Neolithic just as much as they use them in the Paleolithic, but of course there's going to be some differences. So let's talk Paleolithic. Our hunters and gatherers, they did not have permanent settlements, of course. They were nomads moving from place to place. They lived in caves and in small groups. This all makes sense because there was just a few people. They were not able to sustain large populations. In fact, it was an egalitarian setup, which is to say that everyone was pretty much equal. There were no differences between what the men or what the women might have done differently from one another as far as roles around the camp might be. And to this point, they adapted to the environment. So they pretty much, like nomads, they just basically went from place to place, and whatever the environment gave them is what they had to adapt to. Eventually, they would be able to capture fire and be able to maintain it and use that obviously to their benefit to cook food, keep warm, and to scare off wild animals. Along the way, they would domesticate the dog or the wolf and, man's best friend. But that was a Paleolithic period, clearly the longest period of human history, millions of years, in the making. And eventually, once man began to learn a little bit about farming and domesticating plants for consumption, this would really change everything. So now we have people who are going to become farmers. They're going to live in permanent settlements and in villages where the groups of population is going to start to grow. A patriarchal society is going to start where the man will dominate different roles compared to the woman. And we'll start to see different things happen as the men would still go on the hunt, the women would stay back and do farm work and do household type work, because now we are starting to see that the permanent settlements and people are starting to create homes, so to speak. So they will now be modifying the environment. This is something as simple as just, cutting down trees and shaping them and using that timber for our huts and making grass thatched roofs and so forth. But don't forget, the word domestication is going to be applied to both plants and animals. It'll be a very short amount of time that man will domesticate every single animal that we have on the planet and that we can use for doing something, so to provide work for us, for example. But as the Neolithic time period moves on, we could begin to see that it is really going to shift into this farm village. And it's from here that we talk about the agricultural revolution. Some fancy words for farming is now moving on and pretty much taking over. And this will happen across the planet, isolated from one another. We'll see different pockets of societies, and eventually we'll talk about the river valleys where they will really begin to have these systems. But Neolithic villages, we talked about Çatalhöyük, which is in present-day Turkey, where we would see these villages, and we would obviously see food surpluses and populations increase. But with that comes job specialization, because no longer are you going to have a person that's going to be just in charge of hunting food, or for that matter, just in charge of farming, because one farmer can take care of about 50 people. To that point, we will begin to have other jobs and we'll begin to develop other things. So we'll start to see crafts and tool making and different production things along those lines, where people are going to be able to specialize in a particular job and not have to worry about every single thing that might come with survival. So we will begin to have the formation of complex governments and religions, or at least belief systems, where we're going to need rules. We're going to need things that are going to take place so that we can have some order in society. Some of the negative things that we've talked about are disease, and that's mainly due to the domestication of animals and living in close proximity to those animals. Pollution will begin to be a problem because now we've got to dump our stuff when we're not using it and or when we're done with it, and that will be not too far away. So we're going to start to see those issues. And of course, now that we are staying in one spot, we're going to be an easy target. So warfare may begin to grow, and outsiders are going to want to take what is ours, and that is going to be an issue. And again, we begin to hint at gender roles along this way. So theme number 5, when we talk about social structures in AP World History, where that's going to start to shift, and we'll start to see things that are more like what will be for the next several thousand years, actually. But it all happens right off in the beginning with the Neolithic agricultural revolution. Next, we shift gears into our river valleys. And while this is a pretty big unit, so far we've really only talked about Mesopotamia and a little bit with China. Our school year is a little bit different, so we kind of did what we could. You could see on the map on the left-hand edge there, those are our basic ancient river valleys. Going from east to west, we have, west to east. Let's start with the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, Indus, and Yellow. In Mesopotamia, we talked about the cultural crossroads. You might recall there not being too many things that would keep people out. So as a result, we would have all different groups of people that would inhabit that area: the Hittites, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Phoenicians, and the list goes on and on and on. Hammurabi was the king of Babylon, and he's famous for Hammurabi's Code, where they codified and posted rules that people had to follow that was mainly based on social status. So if within your own status you did something or did something wrong, you would be treated equally, just like everyone else in your status. But make no mistake, if you were not in the same status, things were not equal. Cuneiform is their writing system, the wedge-shaped items that they used in they use metal styluses with or sticks in clay tablets. So they began keeping records. In Egypt, the predictable river. Okay, so the Nile River was very predictable. It was a calendar and a growing season and a planting season and a harvesting season. So they knew what was going on in Egypt. And as a result, they quickly began to create some complex belief systems where the pharaohs would claim to be kings on earth, and they built these pyramids to try to get to the afterworld. Hieroglyphics was certainly one of the things that they accomplished in their writing system. Moving along, I'll just mention it quickly, although I don't know how much you may have done this yet. It's going to be coming up more in our upcoming unit with India. But in ancient India, it was dominated by monsoons that we'll be talking about. The two famous city-states there in India along the Indus River, present-day Pakistan, is Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. So I'm going to leave that for next week because that'll be an upcoming unit. In ancient China, it's the Huanghe River, many times just called the Yellow River. And it's often called China's Sorrow because it is yellow. There is this yellowish, silty deposit that floats through it. The water has to be cleaned. It is devastating in nature that it ultimately has a lot of issues with flooding, and it's pretty tough to control. And it was not great. So we're going to see that the Shang dynasty, maybe a fictional dynasty of controlling these rivers, is going to be one of the starting places for China. But along the way, we'll talk about the mandate from heaven and the dynastic cycle. So when we get to Confucianism, we'll talk a little bit about that. But that all came out in the river valleys there with our early period. So moving along, let's talk about how things got going. So in those river valleys and around those places, we're going to start to see that world religions are going to begin to grow. And we'll find that they are actually more similar to each other than they are different. All these religions are going to have gods or a god. They'll have followers, beliefs and practices. And many of these beliefs and practices are really going to be the answers to the questions, like how did we get here and where do we go? the two most famous questions that mankind asks himself. But there are holy books that have all these different doctrines in place of how people really should behave and how we should do things here on earth. All these religions also have places of worship, whether it's a synagogue or a temple or a mosque or a shrine. There's all these places. They're bona fide. They're recognized. And, we'll talk about each one here in just a moment. But the ones that we've studied so far is Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, and we just picked up Christianity with the Roman Empire. So let's talk Judaism. So it's a monotheistic faith. It is a one all-powerful God where Abraham made a covenant with God saying that he believes in him and God would promise him a land of his own, the land of Canaan, and he would promise him with as many followers as there are the stars. And that would work out pretty well for Abraham, and he would move along. But nowhere in their belief system is there a sense of missionary work or going out and trying to convert people. So it just kind of happens through families bringing up their children. A little bit later on, we'll talk about Moses with freeing the slaves out of Egypt. And Moses is the person who's responsible for the Ten Commandments and bringing those down from Mount Sinai. And Judaism has many different beliefs and practices that people and it affects their daily life with proper foods to eat and just ways of showing your belief towards the religion. As we shift into Hinduism, this one's quite a bit different because on the surface we call it polytheistic with the belief of many gods and goddesses. And those, however, to a Hindu, you might speak with someone and they would tell you that it's really just various incarnations of Brahman, the main god. But to that point, there's lots of vocabulary words like dharma, karma, and reincarnation. So a dharma is a person's duty that's passed on through occupation. You would follow your parents' occupation. So me being a teacher, my parents must have been teachers. And you could guess that my children would have to become teachers as well. And if I'm a good teacher, I would get good karma, right? And with good karma, I am hoping to be reincarnated. So the traditional picture of the pyramid with the various castes is going to be a great symbol of the Hindu faith. And speaking of castes, it is a rigid social class structure, one that you cannot get out of. It is based on your parents' occupation, and you will have that occupation and duty and caste for your life. Now, you hope that you get reincarnated to a higher caste. And by doing all that, by following your dharma and getting good karma, that's called samsara. I'm following my rules and my way so that I'm a good person and that I could be reincarnated. No one wants to be an outcast, but people understand that it must have been because you did something wrong that you are an outcast, or what they would say, an untouchable. Buddhism is going to be an outgrowth of Hinduism. Siddhartha Gautama was an Indian prince who was Hindu, and he made several trips into the village and realized through those trips that there must be something more than what he saw, because he saw lots of suffering. He saw lots of old age, he saw lots of sickness, and he saw lots of death. And he came to find out that through what is going to be called the Four Noble Truths, that desire is the root cause of all the world's suffering, because it is since you desire things that you suffer. So Siddhartha would become enlightened, and he would become known as the Buddha, who would not only talk about the Four Noble Truths, but particularly the Eightfold Path. So we see up, the Wheel of Dharma, and the one that I found here isn't quite 8 spokes, but you get the idea that it's following the Eightfold Path that'll eventually get you to your own salvation, your own enlightenment, and the Buddhas would call that the nirvana, the final resting place, an eternal bliss. Buddhism is going to spread itself across all of Southeast Asia. There will be missionary work with Buddhists. There will be monasteries. The Silk Road would become a huge part of spreading Buddhism into China and so forth. So we're going to see that is quite a bit different than the other two religions that we studied so far. Moving into China, we'll talk about Confucianism, and this is much more of a philosophy than a religion. Confucius would talk about the 5 relationships and how that works and how every person has their place. It is very much an ethical code of conduct. So we will see that the 5 relationships, there's the ruler and all the subjects. So there's the superior, and then there is the inferior. The superior being the ruler, the inferior being the subjects, the citizens. So that's relationship number 1. Number 2 is the father and his son. And then there's the older brother and the younger brother. There's the husband and the wife. And then there is the friend and friend. So filial piety is this respect for elders. It's where we'll even see a piece of the veneration of ancestors. It's worshiping and making offerings to our dead relatives so that we have, good things to come. But Confucius is going to subscribe to the idea of mandate from heaven. It makes sense because the ruler has to take care of people. And if the ruler takes care of people, there will be obvious signs from the gods, right? There will be plenty of food. There'll be protection from outsiders. Our rivers won't be flooding and ruining everything. But on the other hand, if our ruler is not doing a good job, the gods will not support him. And we will see things that will be like drought and famine and flooding and invasion. So Confucianism is an ethical code system of behavior that is more of a philosophy than a religion. Okay, the last shift that we'll go to are the classical civilizations. There are 4 classical civilizations outlined on the map here, but so far we've only done what is to the left, okay? So we've got, or to the west, we've got Greece and Rome highlighted here in this purple and orange area. So one of the main themes that we'll talk about with the AP World History is that all empires will gain, consolidate, maintain, and ultimately lose power. And we're going to look at it from this 1,200-year period of time, 600 years before zero and about 600 years after zero. So let's first take a look at ancient Greece, where the concept is about idealism. So everything is going to be perfect and balanced and harmony, and it's going to be like this value that they try to go towards. And it's probably more talking about ancient Athens in the 5th century BCE, where we see a lot of this stuff. So when talking about ancient Greece, let's first just mention that it's their geography. It's their geography that is going to be significant. There will be lots of mountains, lots of islands, a rugged terrain, making it very difficult to unify. But people will later down the road, we'll talk about Alexander the Great, but we're going to see separate city-states like Athens and Sparta are 2 famous ones. Athens being focused on education and the arts, Sparta being focused on military. But it is this concept of idealism, because we have this picture here to the side, which is the Parthenon, having this perfect balance, this perfect harmony, where it is measured up with perfect geometry. And it really is a sense of Greece. So let's talk about government and how it's ideal. Pericles, the famous Athenian statesman, said democracy is what we should have. Everyone should be able to have one vote. Now, of course, he was talking about people who own property, but the idea was there that all people were equal, at least landowning people. We'd have others in the area of philosophy. So Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They had enough time to be able to contemplate the different pieces of how people should live and how we should go about our day. So we still talk about these 3 in our philosophy classes some 2,500 years later. In math, we have the famous mathematicians like Euclid and Pythagoras. And in medicine, we have Hippocrates. The Hippocratic Oath is still in his honor, where doctors will promise to not do things poorly or to give misguided treatments. So doctors famously take the Hippocratic Oath as they become physicians. Alexander the Great is how we'll finish off Greece, and he will unify. He'll basically take on much of what will become the Persian Empire, or take on the Persian Empire, and it'll stretch all the way from Athens in Greece and all the way to the east, stretching towards India, and he'll finish up basically at the Indus River. And he will make little mini versions of Athens all over the place, and he'll be calling them Alexandria. And there's lots of them. They look a lot like Athens, and it's going to bring this culture called the Hellenistic culture throughout this land. So we will see lots of versions of Greece being spread throughout not only the Greek peninsula, but throughout the Persian Empire and down into Egypt. So the ancient Greeks, lots of impact on Western philosophy and ways of thinking. They will impact the Romans and beyond. So speaking of the Romans, let's begin to take a peek with them. About 1,000 years history, 509 BCE to 476. Whoops, I got a typo. 476. Let's see if I can fix that. I can't fix that. It's 476. All roads lead to Rome. So here we are talking about, the famous Roman Empire and how they went about things. So let's talk. This page probably has the most amount of notes to go over, but hopefully by now we're getting it. The geography is going to be different than what it was in Greece. This peninsula is going to be very easy to unify. In fact, the Mediterranean is going to help them. There's a picture of a map, so you might want to zoom in if you're on an iPad. This map here shows Rome right in the center of the Italian peninsula, which is kind of right in the center of the Mediterranean world. And the Romans are going to kick out the Etruscans in 509 BCE, vowing to never again be ruled by one person. So they will want to create limits of power. They will want to have checks and balances, and certainly divisions of power. Certain people can only do certain things. We will see the senators having a very powerful role, the patricians being the famous landowners, and the plebeians being the common folk. They will elect councils for one-year terms to try to make sure that those powers would be limited. In time of need, they might ask one of those councils to be a dictator for 6 months only. And even if you became an emperor, a council, you'd had to wait 10 years before you could do it again. Their accomplishments in Rome are great. Under engineering, we see things like the aqueducts and the Colosseum and the arch, the dome of the Pantheon is going to be some just great accomplishments. Obviously, even just building the road network is going to be huge. And there's also the law system. So the 12 tables that the Romans came up with, they will have the ideas of innocent before guilty. They will have the idea that you have the right to see your accuser. So these are things that we still cherish today in American standards. Whoops. Under empire building. So this is the second phase, right? So there's the Republic and now there's the Empire. With the Empire, we're going to see where Julius Caesar will, and it'll happen before him, but Rome is going to expand. The Punic Wars with the city-state of Carthage, I'm going to try to point to it here on the mouse, in North Africa. Rome will take over more and more land as they continue to spread. And if you get a clearer map, you could see the key in how that's going to expand. But at the end of Julius Caesar's death, which is the end of the Republic, so to speak, we're going to see Augustus. His name was actually Octavian. He is going to become the first citizen of Rome, the exalted one, and this will be the beginning of the Pax Romana, Roman peace. And even though Rome is starting to enter into the definition of an empire, it will be quite good for about 200 years, all the way up through about the year 180 Common Era CE. The Roman road network will certainly help build a strong central government where the Roman legions, the armies, will be in charge. They will keep people in order, and times will be good. But things will start to fall. So we'll enter into the third phase of Rome, where I listed as 476 correctly, that this is the fall of Rome. But along the way, there's going to be some people that will do some things that will change things up. So we'll first see that the rise of Christianity is going to be a big deal, right? So it was Jesus that began, but it was really Paul and others that will spread the idea that somebody else is more important than the emperor. That would be God. So it's going to continue to grow, and this promise of a better life beyond the grave is what many common people are going to see as a reason to convert to Christianity. We will see that Diocletian, the emperor, in around the 250s, 270s or so, he's going to take the empire and he's going to divide it into an eastern and western section. Let me just click over to a map. So Diocletian is going to divide the empire using this blue line here. I'll show you. He's going to divide it into a western and an eastern half. And along the way, actually Constantine will be in charge of the eastern half. But along the way, the Romans are going to realize that it's over here in Constantinople that things are better. These green arrows representing the trade networks coming in from the Far East, the Orient, is going to bring lots of money. So this old Greek city-state called Byzantium is going to be renamed Constantinople. And Constantine himself is going to cause a problem for the Romans because he's going to grant toleration of the Christians, because after all, his grandmother was a Christian, and you can't very well go out and persecute and kill grandma because she's Christian. So he changes things, and that's going to be one of the reasons why, Christianity and Constantine are going to contribute to the fall of Rome. But we'll see some other things. The loyalty and dedication is going to change. We're going to have lots of non-Romans in the Roman army. We're going to have corrupt and greedy politicians. And we'll ultimately have barbarian invasions. We're going to have the Huns and the Goths and the Germans and all these different groups of people are going to come in and ultimately sack Rome by 476, where no longer there will be an emperor in Rome. At the end, we will see that the West, okay, where Diocletian divided the West and the East, the West, Western Europe, is going to turn into the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages is going to be like, the Middle Ages. This is the castles that we studied back in 6th grade, where there's no central government. There is chaos, there is feudalism, and it's not very good. People were afraid to travel anywhere. However, in the East, the Byzantine Empire will grow. In the early days, it'll be called the Eastern Roman Empire. The capital will be Constantinople. It will be good. It will continue to blossom for another 1,000 years, actually, but it's quite a bit different than the Dark Ages of the West. So with that, there's a lot of stuff here. I hope that this was a helpful review of a variety of different topics for our test this week. I wish you luck, and make sure to email your teachers if you have any questions.